We're just going to be using Replit like always. Just a couple announcements that most of them we've heard before. So I mentioned this last time, but we just have a couple more chapters, I guess, sections left in the class. So I hope you've been enjoying it so far. We're a little over halfway through at this point. And if you have any issues, as always, just let me know. Also mentioned this last class, but we may potentially have a bonus meeting. It'll be optional, and it'll just be talking about my experience with autism and neurodiversity and some other topics if we want to talk about them. So keep an eye out for that. And then I also wanted to review the task from last week. So let me find it. Yep, here it is. Okay, so what I tasked you to do towards the end of class last week was to create a customer service menu. Where you basically create one of those things that like if you call a customer service number and it says press 1 to do this, press 2 to do this. Basically just wanted to show you how you can use loops to create one of those yourself. So we were tasked to write a program that prints 3 options to the user. The options didn't really matter. You could really choose what you wanted to, but I had these 3 just as examples. So 1, talk to a representative, 2, ask for hours of operation, and 3, list the options again. And then ask the user to select their option by entering a number or enter Q to quit. If the input is invalid, ask the user to enter a valid option, print the relevant response. You can really make up the answers, it doesn't really matter. And then continue to present the user with the menu so that they can select more options if they want until they enter Q. So I had a slide with hints here, but I'll go ahead and pull up the solution. So it's on slides 5B, which I shared last week. So hopefully you have those, but you can access it at this link here. Okay, and I'm just going to go through this with you one by one. So our first task is that we want to print out the menu to the user. So I just have a print statement where I have print, say 1, speak to a representative. I have this little new line character. I say 2, hours of operation, or 3, list the options again. And like I said, these options don't really matter. I just want you to know how to be able to present more than one option and let the user choose. Oh, sorry, that was my reminder for class to start. All right, and then you want to ask the user for their input. So I called mine choice, and then you want to say choice equals, you want to take input, select an option from the menu, or press Q to quit. And what's important here is that I printed the menu and asked the user for their input before I started the while loop. If I didn't have this line here asking for their choice, then the while loop wouldn't be able to evaluate while choice is not equal to Q. So that's something important to know, is that you typically, if you're doing a while loop based on the user's input, you want to define, for anything, you want to define what variable your while loop is evaluating before your while loop starts. So just something to keep in mind. So first, I want to use a while loop because I want this loop to keep going until the user enters Q for quit. So I have while choice does not equal Q. Now I have this little note saying we need to process their choice. So first, if their choice is 1, then we can print something along the lines of a representative will be with you shortly or something. Then we say else if, or elif, choice is equal to 2. We can print the hours of operation. And then the third option for mine was just list the options again, which I'm going to do anyway because I want the user to be able to continue to select options until they're done. This would mostly be useful if you had a lot of options. So if I had like 5 or something, and people may want to choose more than one. But anyway, so I don't need any other if or elif here, because either way, I'm just going to print the selections again. So this is just, printing their options, and then ask for their input. This is very important that you ask for their input again. Choice equals input, select an option, because if you don't do that, then choice will never update. It will always be not equal to Q, and you'll just get an infinite loop. So be sure that you ask for the input before the loop, and then you ask for the input at the end of the loop, so that once we go back up and evaluate this choice, it'll say if the choice is equal to Q, then we're going to quit. Otherwise, we're just going to run this as long until the user changes it. And then just at the end, this is outside the loop. It's a bit hard to see because of the way that Replit has the line wrapping, but you can see it lines up with this loop, so it's not going to be inside the loop, it's outside the loop, and it's just going to print thank you, goodbye. So I'm going to run this. Because this is not the main.py function, I'm just going to run it like this, Python 3 customer service.py. So you see it prints my menu and what I could choose. I'm going to select 2, prints it again for me if I want to choose another option. Now I'm going to say 1, and then it does a little spiel here and then prints it again. 3. Now if I type any other letter that's not Q, it'll just keep printing the menu, and that's fine. That's fine. And now I'm going to hit Q for quit, and it says thank you, goodbye. So are there any questions over how I approached this or just the general solution? Feel free to ask if you have any questions. And then someone else also put their solution. Yasha put his solution in the in-class questions channel if you want to check out another approach. So typically there's more than one way to solve a programming problem, and if you had a slightly different way, that is totally fine. So if there's no questions on that, we can go ahead and get started with our lesson for today. Lists. Okay, we went over these. All right, so we're talking about lists today, and I just want to keep putting this here. If you want extra practice on lists or anything we talk about, there is this Scientific Computing with Python course, and right here I linked their list chapter. They have several sections on it. So if you want to follow along or do extra practice there. All right, but let's talk about what lists are. So it's very much what it sounds like. It's a series or a list of values. It's a way in Python for you to store collections of data, or another way to say that is to store multiple values into one variable. So this is just like if you're making a grocery list and you have something that you call grocery list, and on your grocery list you have eggs, milk, spinach, broccoli, stuff like that, chips. A list is its own data type. So kind of like how we talked about, we have data types like int or float or string. A list is a special kind of data type. So it's not one of the what we call primitive data types that are really basic, like numbers or letters. It's a list because it's a collection. So it's like a data type of collection, or a can't talk. It is a collection data type. And in Python, we show that something is a list with open and closed square brackets. So you can just define a list as just like you define any variable, like you might define an int or a string. You would use the assignment operator with your variable name. And you would show that it's a list by having brackets and then elements within the list. We call them elements or items separated by commas. So this is just a list containing the numbers 1, 2, and 3. Lists can contain any data type. They can contain numbers like ints and floats. They can contain strings. They can contain booleans, and also mixed data types. So you can have a list that has an int, also a string, and a boolean. You can mix it up in any way. So lists are pretty much just a way to group together data. And they are ordered. So the list of 1, 2, 3 is different from 3, 2, 1, just because they're in a different order. So are there any questions about lists so far? We're going to get into a bit more into them. Just let me know if there are. Oh, and I forgot one more thing. They also allow duplicates. So in your elements inside the list don't have to be unique. You can have 1, 2, 3, 2. You can, like I said, I'm just showing numbers here. I'm going to show some more examples where we have strings, where we have floats, but you can allow duplicates. It's basically just allowing you to write a list just like you would on a piece of paper. Okay, so we kind of talked about what lists are. So how do we make a list? Well, you can we call it constructing a list using brackets. So just like I said, you can name it my list, give it a variable name, use the assignment operator equals, and then just have these brackets here, open bracket and close bracket, and then put your list items in separated by commas. So this one is just 1, 3, 5, and 7. You can also do it with what is called the list constructor. This is just, you just write out list, open parentheses, close parentheses. This just makes an empty list. So you can say new list equals list. That's just a different way to do it. It's usually to create empty lists. You can put stuff inside the parentheses. I'm not really going to go into that because it's way easier to just do the brackets. So mostly you'll just be creating lists like this. So you can say my list equals, and then here's an example where we have some mixed data. So we have hello, which is a string. We have 5, which is an int. Then we have true, which is a Boolean. This other list is just strings. It has dog and cat. So lists are very easy to work with. They're very nice. They're not super strict. So if you are familiar with other programming languages have pretty strict definitions of lists. And I see, have we covered arrays? In Python, there's not really a difference between lists and arrays. We call them lists. Some people call them arrays. They're a little bit different. So what's the difference between using square brackets versus parentheses? Yeah, so the brackets is we call them square brackets. And it's just a way to show that it's a list. These parentheses are used for functions. So you'll usually put it after a function name to show open and close, because usually with functions, you can put something in the middle between the parentheses, like it's called an argument, and it just kind of changes what it does. So the difference between using these two methods, though, is not really much. This one just creates a list with the values already in it, and then this one just creates an empty list. Yeah, and so I see some other things. Yeah, so what's the difference using brackets and lists? There's not really a difference. They both create lists. So the brackets creates a list, and then this way creates a list as well. I just let you know about this method with typing out list, just because you might see it somewhere else. But I really recommend just doing the brackets because it's easier to understand. Yeah, and so yeah, Brendan is putting in the chat in other languages. So if you're familiar with other languages, lists and arrays are very different. In Python, they're pretty much the same. Python is a very good intro to programming language because it's not super strict about some things. Like you can name variables very easily. You don't have to declare variables. But basically, if you are at all familiar with other programming languages, lists are pretty relaxed. They don't have the same constraints that other languages do on arrays and stuff. So anyway, if you're not familiar with other programming languages and that meant nothing to you, no worries. Just know this is how you make a list. Okay, and I think I caught all those questions. And if I didn't, just feel free to like raise your hand or type it again. But yeah, these are great questions. So all you have to do, like I said, just say the name of your list, give it a name just like any other variable, say use the assignment operator, and then use the brackets to show that it's a list. Okay, so list length. So when we talk about lists, it'll have a different number of things inside or items inside. And the length of a list is how many items are in that list. So the length of this list right here is 2 because there's 2 items. We have hello and we have 5. The length of this one here is 4. It's full of Booleans, but if we look, it has 1, 2, 3, 4 items in here. So getting the length of a list is a very common task, which we will kind of mess around with a bit. But you can get this length of a list using the len function. So it's len, open parentheses, close parentheses. And the syntax of this is len, and then the name of your list. So if I have a list here, fruits list, and say it equals apple, banana, cherry. And then if I print len fruits list, does anyone want to guess what that will print? Yeah, 3, exactly. So perfect. So you've got length, perfect. And then I see a couple questions. So when you put words in a list, do you have to put them in quotation marks? Yes. Anytime you have a string or a word where you want Python to process the actual word that you're typing, it needs to be in quotes. Otherwise, Python will think it's a variable or some kind of keyword or something. Python takes everything very literally. So if you have a string, you need to put it in quotes all the time. Good question. And then Booleans aren't in quotes because they're just true or false, and Python knows what those are. So like there's a difference between putting true in quotes and then writing out true, because one is a Boolean that Python knows and the other is a string. Okay. I'm so sorry. My cat just brought me a toy mouse and thinks that he actually caught a mouse. Sorry, that was distracting and adorable. Okay, so yeah, I'm just reading through the comments. Yep. Yeah. Okay, yep, fruits list, length of 3. Oh, that's funny. Okay, yep, just going through this. Okay, so list indexing. So we talked about the length of the list. If we want to get the actual positions of items in this list, it's called indexing. So the index of an item is its position inside the list. And Python and other programming languages typically like to start indexing at 0. Python always indexes at 0. And this just means it starts counting at 0. So this may be a little strange for you if you come from a math world, or if you've just never done programming before. Typically you start counting at 1. Python starts counting at 0 for lists. So if we talk about the 0 position, or position 0, that's actually the first item in the list. The second item is in position 1, the third item is in position 2, etc. Basically, you just start at position 0. And so if you want to access an item, you can access it in a list by its index. So the way that you would do this is you put the list name, brackets, and then inside the brackets, you put the index that you want. So if I want the first element of a list called my list, I would say my list, brackets, and then inside the brackets, put 0. So this is called indexing, and it's very, very common. We'll get some practice doing that. So for example, I have fruits list. It consists, again, I'm going to be using fruits list throughout these examples just to keep it consistent, but we've got apple, banana, cherry. And now if I say print fruits list 1, which one of those will it print? Yep. Yeah, you guys have all got it. Yeah, so it's going to print banana. So that's always just something to remember. First element is index 0, second element is index 1. Great. Okay, so trucking on along with lists, we are familiar with loops. Loops are a very useful way for processing items in a list. You will often, if you're working with a list, it's very common to process it one item at a time using loops. So my question for you is, now that we have talked about loops, which type of loop do you think would be the most useful for iterating over a list? Yeah, perfect. So it's a for list. So that's okay if it wasn't immediately clear to you. So we've got for loops. And the reason for this is that we had 4 item in collection. And this can really easily be substituted as like for I in whatever list you have. So I have a little example here. So we have my list equals the word, it consists of the words hello and world. And I can say for I in my list, print. Oh, that should say print I, not print item. I'm gonna change that. But anyway, so this should say for I in my list, print I. And then this would print hello. And then on the next line, it would print world because it goes through this list. So are there any questions about how using a list, a loop over a list would work? All right, so we'll go over some examples of this. Go back to my slideshow now that I fixed it. Yep, okay, so another one that you can do, just to show you how you might use a list, if you want to define a list of numbers and then you want to do some sort of mathematical operation over those numbers. So I'm defining this list called nums list equals 1, 2, 3, 4. And then for num in nums list, remember you can name this iterator, it's called the iterator. You can name it anything. So I'm going to say for num in nums list, I want to define a new variable called num squared to be equal to num. And remember this double star is exponent, so num squared. And then I want to print that. So for this, it will print 1. Then on the next line, it'll print 2 squared, which is 4. On the next line, it'll print 3 squared, which is 9. And then on the last line, it'll print 4 squared because 4 is the last number in our list. And it'll print 4 squared, which is 16. And then it'll stop because it got to the end of our list. So very common way of dealing with lists and loops at the same time is with the for loop and going over that list with the for loop. Why would you use list over the for loop? It's just a way to process lists. So we'll do some examples actually. I think that's what I have next. Yep. So if you want to go ahead and pull up Replit, I'm just going to be going over some examples there. Okay, so let's say we wanted to have a function that has a list. So I'm going to say my list equals, and we can put whatever we want in there. I'm just going to put some numbers. And let's say that we want to find the square root of each of these numbers. So I'm just making up some numbers here and putting them into my list. And I'm going to say for I in my list, let's say square root equals, does anyone remember how to do square root? What would I type if I wanted to do square root? So it's a bit of a tricky one, but you would raise it to the power of 1/2 or 0.5. So because anything to the 1/2 power is its square root. So there's actually not a built-in Python function for square root, but you can just say star star and then to the 0.5. So good thing to remember. So I've defined the square root variable, and now I just want to print that. All right, let's go ahead and run this and see what it does. And here we are. It went through and it took each item in the list, it calculated the square root, and then it printed that square root. So are there any questions over how this works or what it's doing? All right, let's try another example. Oh, Michael, yes.
Yeah, how does that really work? You connect all that?
How does it connect it? Is that what you asked?
So, so what happens if you don't put the square root in?
So if I don't put the square root in, I could just print, so then I would have to change this because I haven't defined it. But so yeah, if I don't do anything with the list, I could just print what's in the list. So I could just say print I. So I have my list, and then for I in my list, print I. If I ran that, it would just print everything in the list.
Okay.
All right, cool. So I'm going to try another example just to kind of show you guys. So this time I'm going to make my list kind of like a grocery list. I'm going to say chips, water, carrots, milk. And now I'm going to say for I in my list, let's just say I want to have a function that tells me what's the next thing in my grocery list. So first I'm going to say print next item in my grocery list is, comma, and then you can put I. So you could do that. And then this will print every item in my grocery list. So I can run this and it'll say the next item in my grocery list is chips. The next item in my grocery list is water. The next item in my grocery list is carrots, and so on. So that's just some of the ways you can use lists in loops. And I see a question on what is I? So I is called the iterator variable. And we talked about this when we introduced for loops. So for loops It's called they iterate over a collection, or in this case, a list. And this variable is just kind of like a placeholder so that Python keeps track of what it's processing. So the I is each item in the list in this case. So we say for I in my list. That's just any variable or anything inside my list. It's going to go one at a time. So it's going to go to the first one, then the second one, and the third one, and the fourth one, or at position 0, 1, 2, and 3. Any other questions? These are great. So I'll try another example. Let me think. Let's try another math one. So I'll have 5, 2, 8, 10. So I showed we could, like I said, the I is just representing each item in the list, and it changes, so it's going to go through the list, and each time I will be the next item in the list. So if I just say for I in my list, print I, it's just going to go through and select each item in the list and do whatever I tell it to do with it. So in this case, I just say print. In this case, I could say print I divided by 2. And then this will give me my list divided by 2. Yep. So it'll go through each one and divide it by 2 for me. So I've got a couple simple examples. Do you guys want to see more examples, or are you okay to move on? Or are there any questions? That was a lot of questions for me. I want to make sure y'all understand. Yes, Sophie.
I noticed that right now it prints each answer on a new line, and you didn't need to even without saying /n. Is there any reason why it prints each answer on a new line here, but not when not some other times?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So that's because each time you call print, it puts it on a new line. So if I were to just say print 1, print 2, print 3, I'm gonna get rid of that. Paste that. So if I just had this, it would print those each on a new line because I'm calling it 3 separate times. What I'm doing with this is it's going through this for loop and then calling print a separate time each. So it's kind of like if we had it print, if we had multiple print lines all at once, but because we're using a for loop, we just see it written once. So it's actually calling print multiple times. And that's just how the print function works. But yeah, that's a good observation that it will print them each on a different line. Do you need spaces between items in the list? You don't have to, but it makes it a bit easier to read. So I could definitely define a list as like 3, 5, 1, 2, just a bunch of numbers. And that's totally fine. As long as there's commas in between each item, that's perfectly acceptable. It just makes it a bit easier if we put a space after the comma. Just makes it easier to read. Okay, so I'm gonna do another example.
Hey guys, sorry I'm late.
That is perfectly fine. Okay, and yeah, I means item. So that's typically what it stands for, but it's just each item in the list. Okay, so I'm gonna do another example. Let me try to think of one. Let's say I want to print the, what would I want to print? Let's try a different one without numbers. So let's do a bit of a tricky one. So we have true. I'm doing a one with Booleans this time. So true, false, false, true. Now let's say for I in my list, I want to print the opposite of what's in the list. So I'm going to say opposite equals, and we can use the not operator here, not I. So this is not, it means put the, if in case of Booleans, it means put the opposite. So wherever it sees true, it'll say false, and wherever it sees false, it'll say true. So if I want to change everything, now I can say print opposite. And what this will do is it'll go through the list. It'll find the item in the list. It'll change it to the opposite. Well, it won't change it, but it'll print the opposite of that because of this not operator here. We haven't really done the not operator a bunch, so I wanted to show you kind of how we could use that in a for loop. So let's see what this does. Oops, it says you are wrong. Opposite equals not I. Oh, maybe you can't do that. Oh, huh, okay, I thought you would be able to do that. Okay, this time we're not printing out. I don't know why that didn't work. Maybe I'm getting my languages confused. Okay, well anyway, I guess just forget what I just said there because apparently that didn't work. Everyone makes mistakes, that's okay. But anyway, we're just gonna print I in this case. Would opposite does not equal I work? No, that's a good idea, but opposite does not equal I. So if I had written opposite does not equal I, that would not work because this is a comparison operator and we would need to assign opposite to something, whereas this would be comparing it to I. So I think you can technically do like, there's some operation, I think it's like times, I'm getting on a tangent, it doesn't matter. Anyway, that didn't work for whatever reason, but there's an example of Booleans. And just for a final example, we could just say, this one, hello world. Let's just do print I so that we have some examples with strings. Yep, hello, and then world. So that's just how you can use lists in for loops. Very common thing to do. Okay, just checking on the questions. I think I got them. Okay, so if we go back to our slideshow here. So we mentioned that lists can have any type of, it can contain any data type, and that includes lists themselves. So lists can have lists inside of them. This is kind of like when we nest if statements, but like a list is very flexible. It can hold anything. So you can even have list inside of lists. And so what you do is you just make sure you have those brackets. So a bracket is what makes up a list. So if you want to include another list inside your list, you just need to make sure you have brackets in there. And these are called nested brackets. So here I've created a variable called list of lists. And I have it has the first item is another list containing hello and world. The second item is another list containing the numbers 7 and 11. The third item is another list containing true and 8. And the last item is not a list, it's an int, just the number 1000. So just make sure that your brackets line up. And then if we want to talk about the length of a list of lists or a nested list, it's still just the number of items. So it's still just going to be, in this case, 4, because it has the first item is a list, second item is a list, third item is a list, fourth item is an int, but that's still 4 items. So you count each nested list just as one item. And so, yeah, so for this example, if we were to type len list of lists, this would still just return 4. And you can also still use indexing to access each of these items. And just like I said, just like when you count for the length, you count each list as 1. You still count each list by indexes. So this list, this first list here would be index 0, second would be index 1, index 2, and index 3. So you pretty much just treat anything inside the list as its own item. As long as it has this comma here, it's its own item. So if we would say lists of lists 1, we would get this list here, 7, 11. So I want to show just some, oh, I have another point here. And if you want to access a specific number inside of this list here, the 7, 11, you would use another set of brackets with another indices. And if you break it down, so we have list of lists 0. So if you don't pay attention to this 0 here, I wish I could cover it up. But if we just had list of list 0, that would return hello world. That's a list. So if we want to index into that list, we would say, we would index it at 0 to get the first element. And I know that was a lot of words that I just said, so I'm going to show you via example what I mean. So first, let's just start with lists that aren't nested. So I'm just going to say my list. I keep calling it my list. I just want to show you can call it whatever you want. So a list. Doesn't even have to have list in the name. It could be A, B. But I like to make descriptive variables so that when I see them, I know what they mean. And if you were to read them, you also know what they mean. So let's say I have a list of hello, 1, 4.5, and false. So this is a list. And if I said print my list 0, what would this print? Yeah, exactly. It would print hello. And if I made this my list 3, now what would it print? Yep.
Oh, it's lists like to collect items. So what I need, but you can loops in Java.
Yeah, it's pretty similar. In Python, lists are they're much easier to work with. So you pretty much just group things with brackets and then separate them by commas. So they can be anything. But yeah, lots of programming language has similar things. Okay, so I'm seeing a couple different answers. So we have, so my list 3, if we start at index 0, so this is 0, 1, 2, and 3. And I'll run it just so you see. Yeah, so it prints false. So you can even assign variables to these positions. So if I wanted to say my variable equals my list 2, now what would my variable be equal to? Yeah, so my variable would be equal to 4.5. So just going through this, we have our list. We have my variable is my list at index 2. So we have 0, 1, 2, be 4.5. So if we run this and we ask it to print my variable, it's equal to 4.5. Now I did see quotes around false. I just want to make sure you know you don't put quotes around false. That's totally okay if you just put that to show that that's what it's printing. But if we had it print 3, because that would be a false one, it prints false. It kind of just looks like a string to us, but to Python, it's an actual data. Okay, so that's just normal lists. So now if we want to add, so instead here in the second position, I'm going to make it a list itself, and I'm going to have it be 1, 3, 5. Now if I say my variable equals my list 2, now what will it print?
The array or list.
Yeah. Yeah, so now this is going to print out. So I'm going to run this so you can see it. Ah, it didn't. Oh, whoops, I meant 1. Yeah, so it actually will print out this whole list because this is the second item in the list. If I want to access a specific item within that list, so if I wanted to access the first item in this nested list, I can just add on another index and it will go inside the list to get it. So it's kind of like if you think of a list as layered, if you have your main list and then there's a list inside of that list, you go inside another layer and then you still have to index it to get the actual item. And this just takes practice. So if it doesn't make sense immediately, that's okay. So you can see here I have my variable is my list. I have bracket 1 and then bracket 0. So that's get the item at index 1. So we have 0, 1. This is that item. And now inside that item, get index 0, which is this. Oops. Oh, not that. Which is this. And I can do that with any index that that list has. Now, one thing that's important, I'm going to redefine my list because I want to show you something. So one thing that's important is that if you try to access an index that is not available, oops, my list equals. You try to access an index that is not within 0 to, so in this case, it'd be 0, 1, or 2. So if I tried to say my list 3, that would not work. It would give me an error. So it's an index error, list index out of range.
So you have to kind of declare the variable within its range of the list. Yes,
exactly. So you can do, I'm not going to get into this, you can do negative numbers. So negative numbers just goes back 1. So if I did -1, that prints the last item in the list. That's mostly when you use negative numbers, is if you want to print the last item. But that's just a quick aside because I figured that someone would ask about it, because we usually have pretty good questions in this class. Okay, so back to the main slideshow. So we have lists of lists. We had practice accessing items inside lists. So we've got a good foundation of lists. And of course, if you still have questions, feel free to raise your hand, ask a question, or type it in the chat. But now I also, with the time that we have left, I want to talk about changing lists. So lists are what's called mutable. Mutable is just a programming word that means a variable that can be changed without having to reassign it. This means that when you create a list, you can actually use some functions to change that list without having to say, like, my list equals this now. And I'll show you what this means. It doesn't really matter that you know the word mutable right now, but I just want to let you know because you'll probably see it in the future if you continue programming. So like I said, this just means you can change a list after you create it. And the way that you do this, okay, so for example, I have reassign a list value using its index. And so this will replace the value at that index. So kind of like we were talking about accessing different indices inside a list. So if we have fruits list equals apple, banana, cherry, and then let's say we want to change one of the items in that list, we can actually reassign it just by accessing the item. So we can say fruits list at index 2 is now equal to orange. So now, if we say print fruits list, it will replace whatever is at index 2, which is cherry in this case, replace it with orange. So I'm going to show you that real quick. So fruits list equals banana, orange. I'm going to print fruits list. Now I'm going to say, it's called reassigning it. So I'm going to say fruits list 2 equals, oh, whoops, it's cherry in the other example, just to keep it consistent. Now I'm going to say fruits list 2 is now equal to orange. This will actually change the list. So now if I say print fruits list, it will change it. So you can see the first list that we made, apple, banana, cherry, but then we change it by directly accessing one of the elements, and it becomes apple, banana, orange. So this is another very common thing that you can do with lists, is you can access these and change it. So let's redefine it. Let's say we want to change the first element. Yeah, exactly. So in the first one, we defined it here, and it looked like this. And now we're changing it. So this time I'm going to change it with fruits list 0 is equal to orange, and it'll replace that one. So see over here, this was our original list, and this is the list after we changed it. So we can do this with several other examples. So if we want to have a number list, actually I want to do a mixed list. My list again. Why does it print the quotes? It prints the quotes because it is showing you the list. So if you ask Python to print a list, it will print it with a bracket so that you know it's a list. And then it's going to print quotes so that you know that these are strings. That's just how it prints lists. Just a quirky thing that Python does. And now I'm going to define another list, say true 67, but in quotes. So that is a string, not a number. Now I have 5. I want to say my list 2 now equals hello. Now, if I printed my list, what would it print? Oops. So if I have this code here, I define my list. I'm going to reassign the value at index 2, and then I want to print my list. What will it print? Yeah, exactly. So it's going to print true 67, hello. Yeah. Okay, so this is how we access lists and are able to change them. And next, we have about 13 minutes left in class, and I think we can go over a couple more things. So as long as we're all comfortable with changing the list by index, then we can go on to some list methods. Oh, this is annoying. Oh, okay, so aside, I split out my slides so that you just got one fact at a time, but accidentally left this one with all of them all at the same time. So I apologize if that was overwhelming. Let's see it one at a time. So lists are mutable. You can change it after creating one, and you can reassign a list value using its index. And then this is the example that I had there. I thought I had split the slide out. Okay, so the next thing that we want to talk about is methods. So a method is just a function associated with a specific object type. We haven't encountered these yet because we've just been dealing with very simple object types like ints and strings.
Like the methods I learned in Java class.
Yep. Methods are very common across all programming languages that I know of. So these methods are typically pre-built in Python, and you use dot to access the method. I'll show you what this means. So you say variable name. So we're talking about lists here. So this would be the name of your list. To access the method, you would just say dot and then method name. And typically you would have an open and close parentheses. So this is just how you would use that method. And like I said, a method is just a function, which is just a command basically. So you can use methods on any variable of a certain type, or we also call them a certain class. The only ones that we've encountered so far that we can do this with is lists. We'll also learn about how to do this with strings, but today we're just going to talk about list methods. There's a lot of useful methods for lists, and I have a link here if you want to look at the more common ones. There's a lot of them. Okay, so the first method that I want to talk about is adding an item. This is a very common action. You add, or we call it append, an item to the end of the list using this dot append method. And the syntax here is the list name dot append, open parentheses, the value that you want to append, so whatever value you want to add to the list, and close parentheses. This changes the list directly. So like when we talked about mutable, we can change the list. So this just changes the list. So you don't need to use an equal sign to update the list. Like you don't have to reassign it is what we call it. You can just say list.append, then this value. So if we go back to this fruits list, we have banana, apple, cherry. And now I want to say fruits list.append watermelon. This will add watermelon to the end of the list. So now if we print fruits list, it will print banana, apple, cherry, watermelon. So let me show you that real quick. Let's go back to this. So if I have this list of fruits, I can say fruits list.append watermelon. watermelon. And foods list. So if I run this, now our list is banana, apple, cherry, watermelon. And you can do this as many times as you want. So if I want to append another list, pineapple. Now if I print fruits list again, it will print the updated list. So let's run this again. And so the first time we update it, it's banana, apple, cherry, watermelon. And then the second time we update it, it's banana, apple, cherry, watermelon, pineapple. So that's a quick way to add items to your list. And I'm kind of going through these fast just so that I get through the methods in the class, but next class we will go into more details. So another way to change lists is removing an item. And so this is with the dot remove method. So just like the last one was dot append, open parentheses, close parentheses, this one is dot remove with the parentheses. And so just like with append.
Oh, yes. It's like stacks.
Yeah,
So that's
exactly. So you have your list name and then dot remove and then the value that you want to remove. It will find that value and remove it. I think it finds, if you have multiple values equal to that in the list, it will find the first one, I believe. We can test
And
that.
instead of deleting them, it's just kind of use whoa.
Oh no, this is different from popping, but it's similar. And so just like with the append, you don't have to reassign it. You can just say list.remove. So if we wanted to try this one, copy it. So this time we have the same list of fruits, and now we say remove apple. Invalid character. Oh, sometimes that happens when you copy and paste from Google. Okay. It's list.remove apple. Oops, and I gotta print it. Now if I run this, see, it deleted apple. So let's test if we have two listings with apple in it, and we ask it to remove apple, it will just remove the first apple that it found. So it won't remove this last one, it'll just remove the first one that it found. So those are the two main ones that you'll probably use the most often. Are there any questions about append or remove? Okay, and I just want to do a quick little poll here. So do a thumbs up if you want to keep going with more methods, or I don't want to say thumbs down, but some other emoji if you want to do more examples. So thumbs up if you want to learn more methods with the last 5 minutes of class, or some other emoji of your choice if you want to look at more examples of append and remove. I like that. Yeah, so there's like little, oh, it's not a poll. It's like on your Zoom thing, you can add emojis. It's like reactions or something. I don't know.
I got that.
Yeah, okay, so I'm getting some thumbs up. Okay, I think we mostly have thumbs up. So if you want more practice, you could definitely go to the link that I have earlier. But all right, we got mostly thumbs up, so I will continue on with a couple more methods for the rest of the class tab that we have. So we've got append, remove, next we have sort. So this will sort your list alphanumerically, which is just a fancy way to say numbers and letters. So if you sort a list of letters or a list of strings, it will sort them alphabetically. If you have a list of numbers, it will sort them numerically. I have never tried it on lists that contain multiple things. I don't know what that would do, but you typically don't need to. Typically don't have to think about that. I don't know. But just like the other ones, use dot sort, and you don't need to put anything inside this parentheses. Are you able to add and remove from the console? Yeah. So this is.
blank.
Sorry, what?
leave the parentheses blank, I think.
So yeah, so the console is just like Python. So yeah, so anything that you can do in the Python script, you can do in the console. The shell, however, is like a computer. It's like giving commands to a computer. And so that's different. But if you're talking about the console, then yes. So you can say, if you define a list, list stuff. Yeah. So anything that you can do over here, you can do in the console. Okay, back to sort. So you just say dot sort. You don't need to put anything inside sort. It will just sort it. So you can say sort, and if you just say that, it will sort it alphabetically if you have strings, or numerically. I think it's ascending. So we have fruits list equals banana, apple, cherry. So if I say sort and this sorts it, it will sort it alphabetically. So what will the list be? I'm going to change this with dot sort. So if I run this, it just puts it in alphabetical order. You can also add another argument called reverse. If you say reverse equals true inside the parentheses, this will sort it in reverse alphabetical order. So if I were
That's CBAs.
Yep, reverse equals true, the CVAs, yep. And now it puts it in reverse alphabetical order. So that's your sort function. Let me show you real quick with, I'm just going to change this on the inside here. 2, 6, 100, -1. If I sort this one, it will just sort it numerically. So now it prints it -1, 2, 6, 100. And I can do the same thing with the reverse. Oops, make sure inside that. Reverse equals true. Make sure you capitalize true so that Python knows it's the Boolean true. And now if I run this, it will sort it descending. So that's the sort method. Got a couple of minutes left, so let's talk about reverse. So reversing a list order is also a useful method. If you have something in one order and you say, actually, I just want to completely reverse the order that it is in, you can use the dot reverse method. And it's the same as the other ones we've been doing. It's the list name dot reverse. And so for instance, on this one, if we want to say fruits list equals banana, apple, cherry, and then we say fruits list dot reverse, now fruits list will be completely reversed. It will be cherry, banana, apple. So I'll show this to you, and I'll show you how this is different from the sort one that we did. So let's go back to. So I have apple, banana, cherry, and now I want to say fruits list dot reverse. This will just completely reverse the order that the list is currently in.
Without writing reverse equals true inside the sort method.
Yes, so it's a bit different from sort. So sort is actually going to sort it by some standard, so either numerically or alphabetically. The reverse method is not putting it in any specific order. It's just reversing the order you have it here. So if we had, let's see, if we add like watermelon, apple, pineapple, banana, cherry, so that's not alphabetical order at all. And if we call reverse, it's just going to reverse the exact order that the list is in. So in this case, it's cherry, banana, pineapple, apple, watermelon. So those are the 4 main ones. And then let's try it with numbers too, so you can see. So let's say 100, 5, -1, 6.0. Now, if we reverse this, it will just take exactly what we have there and just put it in the opposite order. Okay, now we're right at 7, and I think that's perfect timing. Have a 2 last slides, but that's okay. We didn't get to them. Just a couple points I wanted to make. But so we basically have all of these methods that we went through. 4 main ones that I think you